Welcome, everyone. I'm going to give us just one moment for our audience to join us, and then we'll get our program started. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our monthly African Diaspora Film Club. My name is Nia McAllister, and I'm the Public Programs Manager at the Museum of the African Diaspora in San Francisco. MoAD is a contemporary art museum, and our exhibitions and programming inspire learning through the global lens of the African diaspora. As many of us are settlers, immigrants, or descendants of those forcibly brought to this continent, our institutions were founded upon exclusions and erasures of the indigenous peoples on whose lands we are located. With deep respect, MoAD acknowledges that even in virtual space, we reside on unceded native lands, and thank the Ramaytush and Chochenyo Ohlone peoples of the Bay Area who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. I welcome you to the program series African Diaspora Film Club, occurring monthly with Cornelius Moore, who is the director of California Newsreel, the 53-year-old social issue nonprofit film distribution and production company. He is also an independent film curator specializing in works from and about the Black world. I want to thank Black Public Media for co-sponsoring this series with us. Today, we will discuss the documentary FANNIE LOU HAMER'S AMERICA. If you haven't seen the film, it is currently streaming on PBS's America Reframed and the World Channel, and I'll share some links so that you can access that as well. We are thrilled to have joining us for the discussion executive producer Monica Land and director Joy Davenport. An award-winning journalist, Monica Land has been writing for local and national media outlets for more than 25 years, specializing in investigative and statistical reporting, feature and enterprise articles, general news writing, and historical research. As the niece of civil rights icon FANNIE LOU HAMER, Land has written numerous feature articles about Hamer, as well as an essay for the book Pieces from the Past, Voices of Heroic Women in Civil Rights, published by Joan H. Sadoff and Tesora Books. Joy Elaine Davenport is a director, editor, and composer currently based in Chicago, Illinois. She has worked as a freelancer on every aspect of the film production for over a decade. Her mission as a documentary filmmaker is to elevate and empower underrepresented voices. FANNIE LOU HAMER'S America is her directorial debut. We will start today's discussion with Cornelius, Monica, and Joy, and we encourage everyone to participate by making comments and sharing reactions in the chat and submitting questions through the Q&A box. And finally, please take a moment to type where you're joining us from in the chat, as we love finding the diaspora in the audience. Welcome all. Thank you.
Thank you, Nia, for the welcome. And I'm Cornelius Moore, and I'm joining everybody from San Francisco, which is Ohlone land. And welcome to Monica Land, executive producer, and Joy Davenport, director of FANNIE LOU HAMER'S America. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having us.
Of course.
Yes, thank you very much.
And where are you all today, so we can share with that with people?
I'm in Chicago, Illinois.
Yes, and I am in Mississippi, but I love to point out that I am from Chicago and my heart is still there.
Okay. There's a lot of other folk who are in Chicago from Mississippi too. When I gone there, I've noticed that. So Monica, Mrs. Hamer is your you're her niece, and she was your aunt. So at what point did you want to move from printed material on Mrs. Hamer to film?
Well, I'd always had this love of film, wanted to do films, and didn't really want to do a feature on her because it would be so limited in what could be conveyed, and just really wanted to do a documentary. I love documentary films. It would allow just so much more to be expressed. And so that was around 2005, and it was around 2007 actually when Joy and I connected through mutual acquaintances and start putting the pieces together to try to do this film that would not only amplify Aunt Fannie Lou's voice, but kind of introduce her to a new generation of activists, students, and so forth who probably had never heard of her before. So we've been talking about this, Joy and I, along with Professor Davis Houck and Dr. Megan Parker Brooks since 2007.
2007. That's a long time to be working on a project. So tell us,
It is.
why it. People going and asking why it took this long. There are all these different reasons why it would take long to make a film.
Well, there were really two main reasons. Even though we all connected initially through a cousin of mine, Sula Hamer, that connected me. Sula is a filmmaker, to Keith Beauchamp, who was a filmmaker. And then Keith, in turn, introduced the rest of us to each other. That was in 2007. And we all had separate things going, separate projects. And so, we just kept wondering, let's try to get this done, because we wanted it to be relevant. So many things were happening, but we all had, like I said, just different projects that we were working on. And so around 2016, we just got together and started applying for grants. We received our first grant in 2016. And what has taken so long from 2016, I'll say until now, has been the funding. It's very difficult to fund a project like this, and particularly our project, because it's all in Aunt Fannie Lou's voice. And so archival footage is insanely expensive. I mean, insanely expensive. We were still looking for funding. We had a broadcast date. I was still writing grant applications 2 weeks before broadcast to try to pay for this footage, which is really a shame that, so many different archival houses and stations have access to these wonderful treasures, but they charge, filmmakers through the nose, just to be able to spotlight that footage in a film like this. And so the funding was a major factor in the delay.
So, and Monica, you mentioned the approach of having Mrs. Hamer's both singing voice and speaking voice as the center of the film. So I'd like you both to talk about why you decided to take that approach rather than, which is sort of a traditional documentary where you have a beginning, middle, end, and of someone's life, and that's an aspect you have different too, because you're not linear. You go back and forth over time, and you have Mississippi in the past and Mississippi in the present. So I guess I pose two questions to you: your approach and the nonlinear aspect of the film. Why did you choose those aspects?
I'll defer to Joy on that one, and then I'll have a comment after she explains.
Okay.
Okay, so I think that Monica and I were already in agreement when we came together that it needed to be in her voice, simply because there's no substitute for her voice. Like anything we would try to do would just be weaker than letting her say it, because a narrator is not Fannie Lou Hamer, an interview subject is not Fannie Lou Hamer. The power from her words and her voice is just diluted by putting anything between the audience and her. And then I started to have a crisis as the director over time, just feeling like it wasn't right for me to be a white woman telling a Black woman's story. It's just like there's just too much of that already in history. So it just seemed the only way for me to do it, to be involved at all, was to create a structure where her voice is the only voice speaking for her. Nobody else should speak for her but her.
Okay.
Yes, and if I may piggyback off that, my feelings were when I initially had this idea, it was because out of all the films, documentary films that I had seen, different segments, it was always the same people talking about Aunt Fannie Lou. And I always say that's okay. That's not wrong. It's you know, it's great. It's refreshing because they have an intimate knowledge that nobody else does. But at the same time, I noticed that something was really missing, and that was the family element. I had heard stories about her all my life, but I had never heard any or seen any of my family members, you know, on television or otherwise talking about, you know, that relationship. And so I wanted to explore, you know, the family side, the personal side of her life. But once we started, you know, collecting all the footage, we just did not have the footage or even the audio to support that idea in a complete film. And so the footage that we found was great. A lot of it rare and hadn't been seen since it maybe first aired more than 50 years ago. And so that just kind of spoke to the direction the film took.
And to speak to the linearity or non-linearity, it was actually much more non-linear in our original vision, where I specifically really wanted to blur the line of when we are looking at and when we are talking about. And I used a lot more modern footage and kind of bounced back and forth within the timeline of her life and within the timeline of America. I thought that it would be appropriate to make it impossible to tell the timeline, because the time that we live in is the time that she lived in, is the time of the slaves. It's all the same time. Like, we're still in the same time. When we came to PBS and were being held to their journalistic standards, it became more of a question of, is this accessible? Is this actually doing a service to the audience by being this nonlinear, or are we excluding people from this story because they're not going to follow it the way that subject matter experts like myself might? So we ended up straightening it out quite a bit for PBS, but we still have that element of popping back and forth between the past and the present to create that thread to show we're all in the same story that America has been telling from the start, and it's kind of up to us to keep telling it and telling the truth about it.
Well, I mean, that's really struck me because how appropriate to have present a film when this is Fannie Lou Hamer, when the country is, and state legislatures across the country are feverishly legislating to restrict voting. And Mrs. Hamer was, you know, a very staunch voting right activist, and we're back in many ways in the same situation. I mean, I was doing some research and saw that I was going to ask about Mississippi, and if Mississippi was also involved in legislating to restrict, as Georgia has been, and some other southern states and Arizona and the like. But what I found from was that, well, Mississippi already had a restrictive voting rights legislation, and they didn't need to do any more. But well, you know, and that the campaign is to try to open things up so that people can vote and have more access to voting, and the opening up to people who were formerly incarcerated and the like. The other aspect that I was, I read something, more about Mrs. Hamer and her life, and certainly toward the end of her life, where she had health problems and a lot of being hospitalized and being challenged, and her family being challenged because everything was so expensive for healthcare, and that the state of Mississippi has not taken advantage of the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare and expanding Medicaid, so which would make things available to people. Mrs. Hamer is so dedicated to righting the wrongs for disenfranchised Black people, and also for all poor people. So I felt her spirit that she would be very active and wanting to make sure that things were turned around and made right for poor people. So that's, I just thought, the going back and forth and also not knowing what period you were was so appropriate for this film and for Mrs. Hamer's life and the presentation of it. So how did you find all the footage of Mrs. Hamer speaking? I mean, there was some that I was particularly at college campuses. Was that at the college campuses, or because some of it wasn't going to be TV footage because a lot of TV stations didn't film, right? They or threw away things. They didn't archive things as much as they do now because of the expense of film. So I guess my question is maybe particularly about her speaking at college campuses, because I didn't realize she spoke that much about college campuses. Oh, on college campuses.
She was, well, so there's kind of two branches there. To the part about the college campuses, she was one of the most effective speakers for the movement in Mississippi, for SNCC and the MFDP, and especially around Freedom Summer, and even after for her other efforts with the Freedom Farm. She traveled a lot to get outside support, to either bring in volunteers, but more importantly, to bring in funding for the things that they were trying to accomplish. And for the same reason that we used her voice in the movie, SNCC would send her to these groups at college campuses because you just can't deny her voice. It's completely undeniable. And if you're sitting in a room and hearing her talk about just how it is in Mississippi, it's really hard to sit through that and not be changed and not want to do something about it. So she spent a lot of time on college campuses. She believed really strongly in young radicals, young students. She felt that, it was that energy that was going to save the country, not the energy of the institutions and the kind of power players. She really believed in the grassroots of democracy and saw that in the college, the radicals, the leftists in college. And then the other side of that is the archival aspect, where a lot of things were not properly archived or properly recorded at all. A lot of the best audio we have were recorded by people at these college campuses for these speeches. A lot of the most troublesome clips to get were the ones that were held by the largest institutions. So, and there are a lot of things that just didn't even have her name on it, or her name was misspelled, or they just refer to her as like a heavy set woman. And we just had to stumble upon it. We had a very talented group of archivists with Global Imageworks, and also a really excellent academic research team with Dr. Hauk and Dr. Megan Parker Brooks. And then luck, just serendipity, that the one clip of her saying on camera, "I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired," got added into the film like a week before broadcast because we just stumbled on it. Didn't even know it was there until we just found it in something else.
Monica, do you want to comment on
And
that?
and if I, yes, everything that Joy just said is 100% correct. That we definitely stumbled upon some things, and the disappointing thing is that it really truly became a treasure hunt, and we know that there is a lot more out there. Which is why our website is so important, because we don't want anyone, students or researchers or anyone, to have to look as hard as we have for this footage. And so just finding it, like she said, we know that it's out there, probably in a lot of these older media outlets, in a box somewhere. It has not been digitized, it's deteriorating. We have run into that, not being labeled correctly. And so a lot of the groundwork had been done by Dr. Brooks, but as Joy said, it just really, it just became a treasure hunt. We were looking for one thing and found something else, and so we're, looking, and we're still searching, for materials for the website.
That's quite amazing just to hear that people would not know what a treasure this is, to have Mrs. Hamer on film and her voice. I want to also remember to ask Monica to mention what the website is so that people know how to access it, and we can put that in the chat too, so people have access to that.
Okay, it's just Fannie Lou Hamer's America, one word.
Oh, okay.
Fannie Lou Hamer's America.
I'm just trying to also remember when I first heard about Fannie Lou Hamer. probably because I studied the civil rights movement, I would know about her role. But I think the first time I heard that I really remember was at a Sweet Honey in the Rock concert, because Bernice Johnson Reagan, Dr. Bernice Johnson Reagan, had written a song, called "Fannie Lou Hamer," and with the intro of that, that this little light of mine, her song would fill the air. She rocked the state of Mississippi. Now a lot of other Black people stand there. That really stayed with me. And I remember this concert too. There was a younger, I was young then too, a Black woman said, "Oh, I never," said from the audience, "What is her name? I never heard her. What's her name? Say it again." And so that had an impact too. That give people another generation information about her and acknowledging about her work and her history. So I'd like you, Monica, to say more about your work of trying to make sure that that next generations and younger people do learn about her. And you mentioned when we were off air about the work that you're doing with public school systems in Mississippi. So please share that with us.
I just, it's just necessary. And, I mentioned wanting to see the family element, but just wanting to see her recognized. And I can even go back to when I was a junior in high school. I went to Curie High School in Chicago, and I had a Black History class. And the Black History teacher, I'll never forget her. Her name was Miss Dorothea Wooten. She asked me to make some posters of civil rights activists that I thought were important. And we were going to hang them in the hallway in the Black History or in the history department. And, I did the people everyone knows, Dr. King, Medgar Evers, Rosa Parks, and so forth. But I also did a card on Aunt Fannie Lou. And so that's what kind of stemmed this, is that she should be classified with Medgar Evers, Dr. King, Rosa Parks. But in most cases, she's not. And her contributions were so vast. Just even aside from the activism, her humanitarianism. You were speaking earlier about insurance and things like that. And, metrically, the state of Mississippi has always been on the bottom of everything bad. And so even with the poverty, she recognized this educationally. And so this is why she brought educational programs to her native Sunflower County. This is what sparked the Freedom Farm and the Pig Bank, is that she saw that there was, these provisions were sorely lacking, and she sought to do something about it. So, okay. And so this is again where this film comes in. It would be an educational tool that people could not only learn about her, because so many do already know about her, but then so many don't. And so speaking again to the website, which is going to be a constant work in progress, we're going to be continually adding to it as we find things, as we get pictures. It's never going to be complete. And so it's to help people to learn about her. Anything they want to know historically, what did she do? Why is she important? And I see these things on Google all the time. What did she die of? What is she known for? What are her quotes, or what did she say? Things people want to know. And so I just thought, what, they need a specified place to go and find that information. And that's where our website comes in.
So one of the things I was doing is reading Keisha Blaine's book called Until I'm Free, and which I think is a very great resource too, and finding out some other background about Mrs. Hamer, some of which is in your film, where she, it's distressing to know this, but that she was kind of sidelined by more establishment and middle class, liberal civil rights folk and organizations, and in the film, she's asked about Black Power, which I think in that time was maybe controversial. I don't know when that was, but that she stands up and supports Black Power, and that some of the more conservative or middle of the road civil rights organizations would not. So I like and she also talked about opposing the Vietnam War, all which were kind of controversial things that people in quote unquote civil rights should not talk about those things, but she did. So the question I would pose is that when she did those things, what happened to her? Was she marginalized? Was she challenged? What do you know about those things in response to what she did, her sort of her grassroots and radical stance and her embrace of the Black Power movement?
Well, if I could add a little bit to that question, she became further radicalized by realizing the extent to which power players were not in it for the radicals. That the radicals would be in the street, they'd be out agitating for change now, and then the people who have accumulated power in various places would say, hold on. And she started to feel like they didn't sound any different than any of the other racists back home in Mississippi. Everyone's just saying wait, everyone's just saying compromise, and she's saying we're hungry, we're dying, like we need something right now. And it really disillusioned her. And so when she would embrace these radical stances, like she was 2 years ahead of Dr. King in coming out against Vietnam. She was ahead of even SNCC as an organization. She led the way in opposing the Vietnam War and did it on the grounds of humanitarianism. And whenever she would take these stands ahead of the party leaders, the people who felt like it was their job to make the stands, she would be further marginalized. She was, just not somebody who was seen as what they wanted to promote on the national level. There's a part in the film where she talks about Roy Wilkins specifically cornering her at the Atlantic City Convention and saying, like, go home, you don't know what you're doing. And she did know what she was doing, but she wasn't playing power games like they were. She just wanted to get help for her people. And she realized that's not what was going on. There was a disconnect. And it's why she allied herself with the radicals, because even if they just had to scrounge together a cooperative with their own, whatever they had, they'd help their people today.
Yeah, there's great footage of her saying basically, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead.
No, there was this, where she's like, don't tell me what you're going to do for me in 1972. We need something right now. And that's just reality, that that people can't, why are people wait? People are suffering. If people are suffering, you move forward and do and help them. Anyway, go ahead, Monica. Sorry.
And I was just going, no, it's okay. I was just going to add to that. There were ramifications because of the stance that she took, especially what you were talking about with the Black Power. SNCC lost a lot of their funding because of the attitude that she took with that. And so that line that you spoke of, where she had to clarify what Black Power meant, that's one of the reasons that she did that, because SNCC did lose their money. And, and so she says, this is what Black Power means, is that we want to have a say, educational, whatever. This is what Black Power means. We want to determine some of our destiny. And so she felt the need to clarify what she meant by that, and so there were some, bad results that came from that. But as Joy said, she still stood her ground. And I love the way Joy tells the story, how she was categorized, as militant because of her stance for everything that she wanted for everyone.
And she was very impatient with people who did not understand what it was like to be poor, because she felt that the people who were speaking for her, the people who were elected to speak for her, had never lived like her, and so couldn't actually say anything for her. And when she would try to speak, they'd say, you don't know what you're talking about. And that was just, that's a catch-22, they don't know anything about her. And she tries to tell them, and they're like, you don't know what you're talking about. She just, okay, I'll go home and fix this myself, was her attitude.
Perhaps most people if they know Mrs. Hamer, they know her from the 1964 Democratic Convention speech, and where which is very powerful still. And at the same time, President Lyndon Johnson decided to have a press conference because I think he knew really the power that she would have, and he had this manufactured press conference to compete. But people don't remember his press conference; they remember her speaking. So, and you had in the film that a little image of the LBJ?
So we kind of specifically did not include that little interlude that LBJ tried to pull because history just essentially ignores him at this point when it comes to that. In the moment, he thought that he could shut this message down so that it wouldn't threaten his coronation at that convention. And then all of the networks saw him panicking and having a press conference to announce that Thursday was Thursday. And then they ran the speech in full on the evening news. And so it was like the original Streisand effect. He tried to shut it down and he just made it bigger. And now we don't even want to acknowledge him, honestly, like, because history remembers her, or should.
Right, and even with that, I think a lot of people at the time also saw it for what it really was, because I think part of his announcement was something like, it's 9 months since, President Kennedy was assassinated. Okay, that's sad, but 9 months,
right?
But anything that he could do, anything that he could do, as Joy said, to get her off the air, it was definitely a sign of desperation, but it totally backfired.
In your film, you also have very incredible archival footage of the elected, quote unquote, officials in Mississippi, because they bogusly would be elected because most people couldn't vote, but saying really horrendous things that they clearly thought was right. I mean, there was this, I think it was with Governor Ross Burnett talking with the White Citizens Council, I think, and him using the N-word. Was you decided to bleep that out, or was it bleeped out from
so
the
footage? That was at the level of PBS. That was a decision made that we should not allow those words to be uncensored when they're used as weapons. So when Mrs. Hamer was speaking and using words like that, we did not censor them because she was speaking about her experience. But when Ross Barnett or Paul Johnson says them, he's weaponizing them, and so we're going to bleep those out.
Okay, thank you for that explanation. Personally, I just thought, well, they that's how they talk, and so we need to hear that. The other thing was you had mentioned, Joy, about the Johnson. Is that the Governor Johnson? Is that his name?
Yes.
Talking about taking, and also Monica, you mentioned that too, about taking care of things Mississippi style. So give us the context of that what he was saying at that point in history.
So there's a clip in the film where we intercut Governor Johnson, who was governor in '64, with members of SNCC talking about the harassment that they're experiencing. And one of the last things that Johnson says is that they're not going to allow any group inside or outside of Mississippi to take the law into their own hands. And what he's referring to is voter registration workers specifically. And then he follows that up by saying they're going to make sure law and order is maintained Mississippi style. And he was being asked specifically about 3 missing voting rights volunteers: Andrew Goodman, James Chaney, and Michael Goodman, or Michael Schwerner. Yeah, and they were murdered. Schwerner, yeah, they were murdered. And so Walter Cronkite was producing a special for CBS about the search in Mississippi, and the reporter had just asked Johnson, about these missing people. It's not even a veiled threat at that point. He is specifically saying, like, it's just barely subtext to say, like, we killed them and we'll kill the next people that come to.
Thankfully, those people are gone from at least in being blatant in elected office in Mississippi or in other parts of the country, although some of them still do exist. And Mississippi is now it's 38% Black. It has the largest number of Black elected officials in the nation. And correct me if I'm getting this information wrong. And 31% of the people elected in state legislatures are Black. So that's quite an achievement. Yet, as I think Monica was also saying, Mississippi is, well, it's the poorest state in the union, and still there are big problems. And it's certainly not blaming the Black elected officials for that problem. That there are other forces in the state that are not stepping up to advance the cause and the rights and the opportunities for Black people, but poor people in general. So I'm curious what, well, about the state of Mississippi now, and you can certainly tell me if you feel like you can respond to this about what's going on in Mississippi and the role of a film like this in bringing consciousness to people or reminding people about the history of Mississippi and the present day reality. I guess I will end this sort of question with, given the backlash, I would say, that's happening around the country about educational curriculum and what can be in schools and teaching about history, it would seem to me that the example of Mrs. Hamer and civil rights activists is under threat. That there would be pushback, and they're the people who are maybe even targeted about not being taught about in schools. So what kind of role would you see with your film, and also, Monica, your efforts in education to counter all that?
Well, I certainly hope that it will be a tool. And we had our pilot program in Sunflower County in 2018. And we started there because Aunt Fannie Lou was from Sunflower County, did the majority of her humanitarian work in Sunflower County. And so we were trying to continue her mission there. But with the pilot program, just trying to make the awareness of, like you said, and this is one of the things that we saw that Joy can speak to much better than I can with our first Young Filmmakers Workshop, now called the Sunflower County Film Academy. A lot of those students were born and raised in Sunflower County, may have heard the name Fannie Lou Hamer, but certainly couldn't tell you who she was. And that to me is kind of criminal. I mean, I went to, Marie Curie High School in Chicago. I knew who Marie Curie was. I was interested in the history of who she was. But these kids, a lot of them just didn't have that. And so a portion of the workshop, Joy spent educating them as to who Fannie Lou Hamer was and why she was important. And so we do that and did it on our workshop last year, and we'll probably do it again this year. Hopefully it will be held in Cleveland, Mississippi. And so just amplifying her voice. Mississippi has done some good things in trying to preserve the history, whether it's ugly or not. There are a series of historical markers, and a lot of Mississippi foundations and organizations are eager, to fund projects like this. We've had one funder, I hope I can mention this, the Mississippi Humanities Council. They have given us several grants. They were actually our first grant for this film, 2 for the film, 1 for the workshop, because they want to help preserve Aunt Fannie Lou's legacy. And so I think that's important. Is it a Band-Aid? I don't know. I can't really speak to that, but there are certain efforts to preserve people like Aunt Fannie Lou, who made such tremendous strides and yet, had so many sacrifices in order to accomplish what she did. So just trying to work with the schools. Civil rights learning, history rather, was at one point mandatory learning. I don't know if it is in most states or not, but we have reached out to school districts all over the United States with our educational curriculum in 2018. And once we get the website the way that we want it, we plan to do that again for the 2023 school year, to let them know, hey, we have this resource. Anything you're looking for on Fannie Lou Hamer, you can find it on this site. It's going to be a great educational tool for your students.
So question, I'm not sure if civil rights history is mandatory or taught around the country, but are you saying, Monica, that you think it was at one point it was mandatory in Mississippi curriculum? And the follow-up question is, if there are references to Mrs. Hamer in the schools or even institutions named for her, why do you think people don't know more than just the name?
That's like two questions.
Yes.
I know at one point it was mandatory learning, because in the some of the grant applications that I applied for, specifically the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, which was our largest funder, they specifically ask for analytics or a demographic, something like that. And I did the research myself. And I think at that time, that was around, I guess, 2016, 2017, civil rights was a required teaching in school. Like I said, I don't know what it is now, but I know then that it was. And so just trying to mold this project so that it would be understandable for students K through 12. That's the first thing. I'm sorry, I forgot the second part of it. But like I said, I do know that at one point.
Yeah. No, why don't people, if people know that if she's on a building or something, that it didn't go deeper than that, they wouldn't know more than that, oh, she was somebody who in the past, who I need to, the name of my school.
Honestly, honestly, the reason that this is just my opinion, it doesn't have to be a fact. I think because there wasn't an isolated source for information on her. Even when I started researching her, and this was way before Google, way before the internet, I would have to go to the library, have to go to the, to the microfilm or whatever, the card catalog, and look up information. And it just wasn't a lot. And so when the internet did come along, and even now, you get bits and pieces of her story. And in some cases, you get, the facts are not correct. And that's also something that we wanted to do with this project. One of the most erroneous things that I continue to hear, and it was actually in an article that Joey and Ira recently interviewed for, and it just really sparked a nerve. People think that when Aunt Fannie Lou was arrested, that she was actually in the restaurant. She was arrested in the restaurant, and she wasn't. She never went in. And in our film, she says, I was on the bus when they rushed out. But people think that she was actually inside. And so that may be small, but it's still wrong. And so trying to correct things like that was also part of our mission. And so because, there is not one place like the King Center, Medgar Evers, they have the Murley and Medgar Evers Institute. There is no centralized place that you can go and get, research information on Aunt Fannie Lou. And so that could contribute, to why these kids don't know a lot about her, because most people are not going to dig and dig and dig like we did for information. We had a goal, we had a purpose. But see, kids, they get bored easily. If they can't find it, they're going to move on to something new. And so by us having this website, having a centralized location for everything Fannie Lou Hamer, we hope that will, contribute to her knowledge.
I would also point out that there was a period of time, brief, period of time when civil rights was mandated to be taught in Mississippi classrooms, and now that's something that's being debated away. I don't know if that's something that has legally changed yet, but I know that in other states around the South and other places in the country, there is an anti-historical movement to stop teaching real history, just to try to protect white kids from the sins of the past or something like that. I don't. It's not logical. It doesn't make sense. But that is happening now. That this effort to rewrite the history of our country, and so the purpose of this project, both the educational side and the film side, is to make sure that this record is out there, because there are active forces trying to erase or rewrite it as we speak.
There are some questions in the chat about further research and reading that people could do. I mentioned the book by Keisha Blaine that's new. It's called Until I Am Free. Can you recommend some other sources, some other books that people could try to find about Mrs. Hamer?
So Dr. Megan Parker
Sure.
Books has written an excellent book,
Go
A
ahead,
Voice
Joy.
That Could Stir an Army, about how she spoke in her life. And she also co-authored with Dr. Davis Houck a book that's just Fannie Lou Hamer's speeches that was an invaluable resource for us putting the film together. Monica, I know you know other ones too.
Yeah, her last book was America's #1 freedom fighting woman. I think that was 2019. I think it came out. And then Megan also wrote a children's book specifically for our curriculum that's on our website, Fannie Lou Hamer'S America. It's called Planting Seeds. And then Megan also did an 8-minute animated movie with Brain Pop for our K through 12 curriculum entitled Fannie Lou Hamer. So even kids, as young as, 6, 7, and 8, they can watch this and still be informed as to who Fannie Lou Hamer was, what she did, what are her accomplishments. But we have on our website every book that we are currently aware of that has been written about Aunt Fannie Lou. Of course, our books are on the top, Megan Parker Brooks, but we don't want to be slanted in our information. And so that's why all of the biographies written about her are there. People can, make their decision as to which ones they want to read. But that again, with this website, we're going to list everything that's out there eventually, unless it's just glaringly wrong.
Someone said, I read an amazing book called Walk With Me about Fannie Lou Hamer. That might be on your website. Did Mrs. Hamer ever do a autobiography, memoir?
There was a biography
she
called
did.
To Praise Our Bridges.
Go ahead, Joy.
We might be thinking about the same one, To Praise Our Bridges, which I think can be found
It
at the
is.
Library of Congress. That's where I first saw it. And so that's her telling her own story. I pulled heavily from that account in structuring the film.
And someone also mentioned that the book by Harriet Washington about medical apartheid, because Mrs. Hamer, when she went in the hospital to get some surgery done, she was sterilized without her consent. And that story is also in the book of Medical Apartheid. And Mrs. Hamer talks about that in the accounts that I've read, that she was not alone with that happening to women in the South, Black women in the South particularly.
Black and Hispanic women. And
yes.
that practice continued into the 80s, as far as I know.
Exactly, right. Even here in California, women who were incarcerated, that happened to them.
I would also say, as just resources that are available, books and movies, other accounts, but also veterans of the civil rights movement, or just neighbors, elders, people who have not told their own stories, because those are the people who can tell you about what's been going on. In a lot of cases, maybe it hurts too much and they've chosen not to, but that was what we found with the Sunflower County Film Academy. We started telling them about this history, and we were encouraging them to tell tell the histories in their own communities, their own families. And when they went to interview some of their elders, they found that some of those elders had worked with Mrs. Hamer, were involved in those movements and just hadn't talked about it, just went back home to their life. So that's an invaluable resource that's really in threat of disappearing. And that's sort of what drove me to make documentaries to begin with, is that the human resources, the people who have lived and done this work and then just went back to their lives because they had to make a living, those people are amazing resources.
Could you mention the name of
And
the autobiography
if I may
again, please?
add,
The biography again, the name of the biography.
The autobiography, and Fannie
Yes.
Lou's autobiography, To Praise Our
Yes.
Bridges.
To praise our
But
bridges.
what I was going to say, yes, what I was going to mention, you asked earlier about footage. This is exactly one of the problems that Joy and I encountered with this film, what you were speaking about with the Mississippi appendectomy, the sterilization. We knew that there was at least one place that Aunt Fannie Lou had talked about that, and that was on the Gil Noble show. And we just about killed ourselves looking for that footage, looking for that show, and could not find it anywhere. And when we finally found a copy of it, Joy was actually in New York. It's at the Paley Center, but it was a VHS tape that the quality was so poor that we couldn't pull anything from it. And something of that nature surely should be digitized. We called around everywhere looking for it, but it just was not available. And unfortunately, that's going to be one of those treasures that's going to be lost. The one place that we knew she talked about that experience.
That happened to us over and over again, where we knew as historians that
Yes.
something was true, but we could not find the media that would support that as evidence in a film.
I just want to make sure that people know that tomorrow there'll be a screening on the World Channel of the film, followed with a discussion with you, Monica, at 9 a.m. Pacific time and 12 p.m. Eastern time. So people can do that, find that out, and make sure that people know that the film is available for another couple weeks on PBS platform, right? And it's also available in distribution with Women Make Movies, a film distributor in New York. It's WMM.com, correct?
And I also believe that it's available video on
Correct.
demand from Amazon, iTunes, the usual
Okay.
suspects. But it's streaming for free until
And
the end of the month.
YouTube, you can, exactly. It's also on YouTube. It's free until March 31st.
Okay. I forgot what I was gonna say. Oh no, someone posted about given that there now, there's a great need to talk about poverty and the rights and organizing of poor people. What do you think, Monica, would say that your aunt would be doing now? Or there's the Poor People's Campaign with Reverend William Barber, and I can imagine her being at the front of that line, and because that was really a great concern of hers.
Well, considering how she'd be 105 years old this year, I don't think she would be would be around. But up until unfortunately she passed away, which is 45 years ago tomorrow, actually, she was still doing the best that she could to work. I think I can say safely that she literally worked herself to death because she was so concerned about people. And so if she weren't 105 years old, if she were younger, I think she still would be doing what she could to advise people. She loved working with younger people. And so I can see her handing off the baton to the younger people, the younger generation of today, and helping them to accomplish what she worked for 50 years ago.
Thank you for that. I'm trying, there are a lot of people active in the chat, so I want to make sure I get these questions. One was about in the Mississippi legislature that I mentioned this 31% of the legislatures in Mississippi is Black, but someone asked Ronald, are Black working class women represented at the state legislature? And I actually did some research about that, but I can't find I don't think women are represented equally as their percentage of the population. I know. I just don't have the details unless you all have some feedback about that. Some details we could.
No, I don't know that level of detail about the Mississippi
Okay.
legislature at the moment.
Okay.
Although
I don't either.
I can say, so this is an anecdote from the film that ended up getting cut that maybe speaks to the question without being able to answer it. But there was, Mrs. Hamer was responsible, her and the MFDP and SNCC, for getting the first Black elected officials elected in the state of Mississippi since Reconstruction, specifically the first state congressperson of color to be elected since Reconstruction. And so he in a previous cut of the film, he told the story about how, he got into office and then got a call from Mrs. Hamer saying, especially like, she called him just to say, now we put you there and we're going to be watching you.
Right.
And if you don't vote in our interests, we'll march on you just as much as we marched on those white folks that we replaced them with you. So, fly straight, we're watching. So she did not automatically trust the people that she elected because she knew better. And so to the question about whether the working class people are represented, my guess is probably not as much as the middle and upper class, but that they are the ones who hold the power. They're the ones who can organize to march on the office and demand things from the people that are supposed to be speaking for them. That was Mrs. Hamer's whole philosophy. We put you there, but we'll be watching. And we'll replace you if we need to. So I guess this is me getting excited about the idea of working class women marching on Jackson to replace the legislature, but that's more just in my head.
Am I missing? I'm going to call on Elizabeth. I feel like I'm.
Hi, Cornelius.
Yeah. Am I missing any questions?
There are a couple in the Q&A box. So.
Oh, in the Q&A box. I didn't look there. Okay.
Frida Leeper asks, is there a strong civil rights movement going on in Mississippi today for voting rights?
I don't know of a specifically Mississippi-based campaign that's going on right now. I know that there are some national and southern, like regional campaigns. I am not personally aware of anything concerted going on in Mississippi at the moment.
Neither am I. Not to say that there isn't. Yeah, right. Not that there isn't. I'm just not aware of any.
Okay, and then there's another question from P. Fox. The statement "tired of being sick and tired" is being used and misused in so many ways. For example, a book regarding chronic illness, nothing to do with civil or human rights, or Mrs. Hamer, etc. Is that frustrating to you?
Personally, I think that a book about, people who have a chronic illness is very much tied into the same things that Mrs. Hamer was working for. That if you're going to talk about not just being a civil rights activist, but being a human rights activist, which is how she categorized herself, then I would say that that's not actually being misused in that case, because she suffered from chronic ailments, some of which were imposed upon her by the state of Mississippi. But like it's the same thing. To me, it seems like an appropriate use.
Exactly, and actually, and I've mentioned this before. Aunt Fannie Lou got involved in activism in her 40s. And, I've heard my relatives, cousins, and my mother say long before she was involved in politics, that was just her thing. That was her saying then. And like Joy said, she had been sick all her life, with different kinds of illnesses. And so she was saying that before she got involved in activism. She just took it with her when she became active because it seemed so appropriate. But it was a life of, servitude, so to speak, as a sharecropper that, you know, that saying, that quote actually stems from. So again, chronic illness is very much appropriate. She didn't pen that just for the civil rights movement. That was just something she had been saying all her life, all of her adult life.
Thank you for that. And a couple more questions, and then we'll almost at time, about incorporating Mrs. Hamer's singing into the film. How did she incorporate singing in the civil rights movement? That's one question.
So
And the
this,
other one is about nonviolence and her perspective on nonviolence.
I'm excited to talk about both of those, but I'll jump
Okay.
on the first one first. The with the songs, this was something that the structure of the film was made to resemble one of her speeches that she would give when she was traveling the country, speaking to colleges or activist gatherings. And that's what she would do in her speeches. She would tell a story and then sing a song, and then tell another story and then sing a song. And so this was absolutely a feature of her presence, was not just her speaking voice, but her singing voice, and how that would really get the audience invested, and you know, they'd sing along too. Well, it's powerful in its own way. It tells its own story. And so the music, the song, her singing voice and the music that backs up that singing voice was just as much a consideration as the spoken words, because it tells just as much of a story.
Exactly. And her singing is what first brought her to the attention of SNCC. And I think in one of her first acts, when they went down to try to register on August 31st, the school bus, there were like 18 of them on the bus. And when they got there, she says that there were more policemen surrounding the courthouse than she'd ever seen in her life. So it was an intimidation tactic, and the people were scared to get off the bus. But what did she do? She got up and she started singing. And one by one, they filed off the bus. And so that singing motivated people. Like Joy said, you know, that was just, we have so many pictures of her singing because it was a motivator. So as Joy said, it was just so important, you know, to have that in.
And I'm very glad you did. Because as I said in the beginning, her connection with Bernice Johnson Reagan, Dr. Bernice Johnson Reagan, Sweet Honey in the Rock. I mean, it's etched in my memory about Mrs. Hamer as a song leader in the movement. And one more, the question about nonviolence, and if you want to address that, please do. And her yeah, go ahead.
I think that this is an important nuance to talk about, because nonviolence was a tactic. For some people, it was a way of life or an ideal, but for Mrs. Hamer, it was a tactic to say, well, if we try to shoot back at the white folks, they're going to massacre us. But at the same time, I'm not afraid to shoot back. You know, she would joke about having a shotgun by the door and, you know, being ready for whatever would happen, while at the same time recognizing that they would probably be annihilated if they became a violent movement. So there were people within SNCC who saw this as absolutely an ideal and a way of life. And then there were people, in a lot of cases, local people, who said, we know how things go here. We know that we can only fight back so much before we get wiped out, but we will fight back however we can. Right now, the way we're going to fight back is through nonviolence and through voting. But if that doesn't work, well, we have other methods too. And she says that towards the end of the film. You know, she doesn't understand why people will not grant the dignity of being a person to the Black population, because if you deny them that for long enough, they're going to tear it up.
And the kind of reality is a contribution for me. I'm, you know, family in the South, and I know people are just for various reasons have arms, and they'll use it for self-defense. They'll use it to defend against animals and defend against people. So people did have arms. It was, for a lot of people, the nonviolence is a tactic or a strategy, and for other people, it's like people want to defend themselves. That's my 2 cents. Okay.
And we asked this last question that says the quote, "The whole world is watching," by Mrs. Hamer was in the film. The quote has been used by social movements, but I believe not attributed to her. Is this correct? Is that quote something that should be attributed to her?
I feel like it is. I mean, it's certainly something that she said regularly, but is a somewhat generic phrase, I suppose. I'm not sure if that's the sort of thing that would need to be attributed to her, but it is very true that a lot of the phrases that she popularized later just became unattributed, just phrases that people throw around. I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. Until I'm free, you're not free either. Like these were her phrases that did not get attributed. So perhaps the whole world is watching us should have an attribution as well.
To Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer as well. Yes. So I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Thank you to Monica Land. Thank you to Joy Davenport. And the film is available from on Amazon, you said, but also through Women Make Movies for organizations who want to rent or purchase it. Thank you again.
Thank
you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. Thank you for being here, all three of you, for this wonderful conversation. I want to thank my colleague Nia, who opened the program and got us going. I also just want to let everyone know who's with us today that our next African Diaspora Film Club will be on Sunday, April 3rd, and we'll be discussing the film We Like It Like That, the story of Latin Boogaloo. And Cornelius will be in conversation with the writer and director Matthew Ramirez Warren. So please look out for that and register for it on our website. I also want to let everyone know that MoAD's currently installing new exhibitions, so we're closed to the public, but we will reopen on Thursday, March 31st. So if you're local or traveling to the Bay Area, please come see us for brand new exhibitions. We would also love to hear your feedback about today's program. I put a link to the survey in the chat, and it should also pop up in your browser when you close out of Zoom. We also are offering an incentive to try to get more people to fill out the survey. So we're going to be doing a monthly raffle for $25 gift certificate to our MoAD online bookstore for people who fill out the survey. So do that, and you might win $25 credit and get to purchase a lovely book. Of course, we're always accepting donations in any amount that you can support the museum. You can donate on our website, moadsf.org, or you can text a donation to 56512, type the word MoADSF, and then follow the link to donate. And finally, I want to thank Black Public Media, our partner on this program, for supporting us and for helping to make this program possible. Thank you, Ms. Davenport and Ms. Land and Cornelius, for this wonderful conversation this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
You have a nice evening, everybody.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.